It's said that death is life's greatest equalizer. It doesn't care who you are, what you've done, how much money you've made, or what status you achieve. Death comes for us all. Historically, humans have embraced the idea of a noble death, like laying one's life down in service of country or in defense of family. But death doesn't always oblige in such honorable ways. It has just as much of a sense of humor as it does a reverence for tragedy. And today, we'll look at unconventional ways death has written the history books. These are some of history's strangest ways to go. Perhaps you've heard the term Draconian in reference to something, usually a law so rigid that it leaves no room for forgiveness. It was an Athenian legislator in 7th century BC who gave us that term. His name was Draco, and he's one of the most important, influential figures in ancient Greece. Before he took office, Athens was ruled by oral law, which was far from a perfect system as it allowed for laws to be manipulated to oppress Athenians and strip them of their rights. This was because when it came to oral law, only the wealthy knew what the law actually was and wasn't, so they were able to bend them to their will no matter the situation. To remedy this, Draco instituted a system of written law. Those laws were then posted in public so that they could neither be ignored nor amended to suppress any Athens citizen. This way, everyone knew what was legal and what wasn't. Draco's laws, however, were famously strict and left nothing to interpretation. For any and every crime, there were two possible punishments that could be meted out. An offender could either be enslaved or put to death. Petty thievery was viewed the same way as murder in the eyes of Draconian law, and when he was once asked why death was such a common penalty for defying regulations, he claimed that it was the perfect punishment for lesser crimes. In his mind, the problem was that there was no worse punishment than death for greater crimes, so every law was essentially put on the same playing field. Despite the harshness of the laws Draco instituted, he was almost universally loved, and that adoration would directly lead to his demise. At a theater around 600 BC, Draco was receiving cheers and displays of approval from the Athens citizenry that got a bit out of hand. It was customary in that time period to show political approval by showering politicians in hats and cloaks. When you think of these items of clothing, you likely think of items that are made of linen, but at this time, cloaks were made using chainmail and other heavy armor to protect from knives and spears. This obviously made these items heavier than your standard trench coat of more modern times. As more and more cloaks were tossed onto him, Draco either suffocated due to the lack of air or the weight of all the cloaks making it impossible for him to inhale. Either way, the show of adoration was just as unforgiving as the laws he instituted. Speaking of beloved politicians, in 1567, Hans Steininger had just been elected to his 6th straight term as governor of Braunau, a small Austrian town on the border with Germany. Braunau was Steininger's hometown, and he ruled with adoration for its people, which earned him the same in return. He stood out everywhere he went, which would have been true even if he was just an average citizen. He was impossible to miss with a beard that measured a full 4.5 feet, which is around 1.4 meters long. It was his greatest source of pride. He spent hours a day brushing, cleaning, and grooming it. It was so long, in fact, that it would drag along the ground, so to avoid the tripping hazard, he'd roll it up and stuff it in his pocket. In September 1567, a fire started in a Braunau home that grew so large that it threatened to engulf much of the town. Upon hearing the news, Steininger jumped to his feet and bolted towards the door of his home to see if he could help. When he reached the staircase, though, it quickly became apparent to him that he had forgotten to do one very important thing. His beard was hanging free, and in his rush, Steininger stepped on it. The misstep sent him tumbling hard and fast down his stairs, and on the way down, he snapped his neck and died as a result. Before he was buried, Steininger's beard was cut off and presented to his family. For centuries, it was passed down by generations until it ended up in a museum. Next time you're in Braunau, stop by and see it, as the 457-year-old beard is still on display today. In 1902, a boy named Stanton Walker was hanging out with two of his friends at a baseball game. Sitting on a pile of fence rails, the three friends were watching attentively, with Stanton sitting in the middle of the other two. The boy to his left was keeping score of the game when his pencil gradually went dull and needed a good sharpening. Turning to the other two, he asked if either of them had a knife he could borrow. The boy on Stanton's right fished in his pocket for one and opened it up. As he reached his arm out to hand it over to the scorekeeper, a batter made contact with a pitch, sending a line drive foul ball directly at the group of three. It was so fast that none of the boys had a moment to react. The ball made perfect contact with the boy's hand holding the knife, and the force of the impact caused the blade to plunge between two of Stanton's ribs, severing a major artery just below the heart. Without a word or a single groan, Stanton fell off the pile of fence rails and was likely already dead before he hit the ground. Politics has a way of turning into the family business, as sons and daughters often follow in the footsteps of their parents. Such was the case of Adelbert Stone Hay, son of famed Secretary of State John Hay, who served under Presidents McKinley and Theodore Roosevelt. Around 1900, 25-year-old Adelbert had already been appointed the consul of South Africa, and it looked like there was a promising political career ahead of him. Tragically, his life was cut short on June 23, 1901. While sitting on the sill of an open window in New Haven, Connecticut, Adelbert dozed off. When sleep took hold, he fell backwards out of the window and tumbled 60 feet, or 18 meters, to his death. Not long before, he had just been appointed the Assistant Secretary to President McKinley, a position that would have accelerated his political hopes.